Well, that's the clarion call to start. That's the start. That's the start whistle. Okay, so what are we talking about, and where are we up to basically? So this is hopefully, if we get this right this evening, um, everyone behaves themselves. This is the last session about purpose of the world. We kind of set things up last week, and this week we're going to kind of really ramp it up. We'll revise last week in a second. And please God, next week we're going to get to a much more practical place, which is the world of free will. In other words, what do we have control over? What do we not have control over? Are there any limits to free will? How does free will work? What about exceptions? What does free will do? Why is it there? That's all going to be from next week. That I think is going to take us a good 3 weeks or so, at least, but let's see where we get to. Okay, so if you remember the story so far, previously on Depth Charge, we outlined quite a little bit of philosophy about the infinite and the finite and God. What can you ask about God, or what can't you ask about God? And we're getting a little bit more practical here because we're talking about now purpose of the world. Okay, in other words, now the world is here. What is its purpose? Okay, well, what is it doing? What is it there for? You remember a revision from last week, which was the bottles. In other words, now that they've created the bottle factory, what's it here for? Right? That's kind of where we're up to. The first thing I think we should do to tackle this, and we're going to see the sources in a minute, is this word purpose is a little bit scary. Why is that? Because I mean, it just is. What is purpose? Without getting too good as well, like what's purpose about? Some people it can be a very scary word because the implication is that everything has a reason, which certainly Jewishly is so. And if that reason isn't being hit, then you might feel good, but you're not doing it. Meaning someone who runs an 800-meter race and feels fantastic, but they only managed to do 750 meters and they forgot they're supposed to do 800. They thought they feel fantastic, but they haven't necessarily managed to run the race. Right. So purpose for some can be, a bit of a scary word. But to be honest, it's an important word because if you haven't worked out purpose, then you haven't got anything to measure anything against, can't really know what progress is, and you don't know when you're doing it right or when you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? If you have a certain level, I don't know, blood pressure, or a certain pulse. Now, for some people, whatever pulse it is might be good, might be bad. It depends what the purpose is. If you're running a marathon, then you might need to get, down to a certain pulse. Whereas, if you're a little bit older, and you're just kind of looking after your health in a nice and stable way, then you might be happy with such a pulse. It all depends on purpose. It's really important, that word purpose. I don't think we say it enough. I don't think we talk about it enough. That's an important word. So, if we're talking about the purpose of the world, how would I know what that is? Meaning, if I ask what the purpose of, I don't know, your work is, you'd be able to tell me because you can work out yourself. Maybe you can ask a boss, or it could be, you've got your own reasons for whatever field that you've entered. But if you ask what the purpose of the world is, like, how would you even get such an answer? You know what I mean? Like, where would you get that from?
You mean
Where
without resorting to the Torah or something like that? You mean
yeah,
like how, from a philosophical standpoint, how do you figure out what the purpose of the world is?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, so you're right, Gideon. You have to go back to the instruction manual, right? That's the most instruction manuals cover the basic purpose of the item, or at least the safety rules. So when we talk about, and we will now, purpose of the world, we're not kind of just random speculation. This makes sense, and this sounds good, and you know what I mean? I mean, we're looking at the oral tradition. In other words, what was passed down through generations in terms of why Hashem would have made the world. Right? I'm not commenting on how Hashem made the world. I'm just commenting on why, in other words, purpose, right? It probably deserves a slightly fuller explanation as to what the oral law is, and kind of how these writings were combined and who wrote them down, etc. But we're not going to do that fully, certainly not yet. But safe to say that we're looking at our Jewish texts which explain, why God made the world, because they have a tradition or they have different texts and sources they're putting together.
And presumably these will differ from non-Jewish sources who grapple with the same question.
Yeah. I can't say I'm an expert in those on this point, but yeah, I'm assuming so. I'm assuming so. Yeah. There's slightly different in religion, in as much as the kind of we, as it were, go back to the creation of the world, right? Whereas others, we call them the sequels. Yeah, other religions only started much later, by their own admission kind of thing. But okay, be that as it may. Right, I'm going to share screen. I really hope this is going to work. Okay, can we see this? You see this? Anyone see this?
Not yet. I see a
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes? Okay, amazing. So I'm just going to take out.
Is this what you sent on the? It looks very familiar.
Yes, this is what I sent, just the non-PDF version.
Right.
Okay. Right. Can you see it? Can you see it well?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to get all the way down to the sources. Okay, now we haven't really done this that much, but I'm going to go to the sources, forget the notes on the side. Okay, so here we go. The first source on this, and let me give you the map. Excuse me, the map that we're going to paint tonight is the contradiction we mentioned very speedily at the end of last week. Namely, there seems to be two different almost approaches in terms of why God would make the world. One is to give us pleasure. I'll deal with that now or in a minute. And the other one is for God's honor. The question is how they go together, and that's what we're going to try and resolve. Okay, so the first source here is like this. The Ramchal, echoed by many others, including Sefer HaChinuch, Ramchal, Ramosha Chaim Lutzato, who's buried in Tiberias. He lived around 500 years ago. Very young, actually, young and died young. He wrote an amazing book called Derech Hashem. They've got it in English, which is kind of the philosophical or hashkafic, we would say, in other Jewish outlook in many different aspects of Torah. So he has a chapter on the purpose of creation. So he says like this. I'm going to read it in English, but you can follow in the Hebrew if you like. He says the purpose of creation, just over here if you like, is for Hashem to give of his goodness to others. Right? I'm going to explain this, don't worry. Hashem is the definition of perfection and goodness, and the essence of goodness is providing goodness to others. In other words, the chain starts as follows. Hashem is essentially good. Right? That doesn't mean that challenging things don't happen, and we'll deal with that in 2 topics' time, but Hashem is essentially good. Now, just like a property of heat is that, if you touch it, it hurts or whatever it is, it gives off heat, emits heat. Property of essential goodness is that essential goodness gives good to others. It emanates goodness, so to speak. Okay, so Hashem is essentially good, and therefore he gives good to others. Now, I'm going a few steps over here. He says as follows: having determined that this would be the ultimate goodness, he provided a place for people to earn that goodness by emulating him. Right? Now, what that means in plain English is like this: Hashem created the world in order to give to us. Meaning, essential goodness means giving good to others, and the world is an arena by which we can earn our goodness. In other words, the world is for us to earn our reward. Now, of course, the main reward is in the next world, but here is where you earn that. As God created.
Doesn't that mean until Hashem created the world, he wasn't able to manifest his infinite goodness?
There was no expression of goodness, yeah.
So, but then doesn't that mean that he wasn't infinite because he couldn't manifest isn't there a kind of catch-22 here? That until he created the world to be able to manifest his infinite goodness, his infinity was challenged.
I don't think it goes back to his infinity, but you're right. There was no expression of goodness. Yeah, you can think of it like that. Right. Right. Yeah. It's a fair point. We're going to get much worse infinity problems soon, Gideon. Don't worry. But definitely a fair point. All right. So he created the world in order to give good to us. Now there are a couple of steps here that we need to know, which is giving, or how to put it simply, the best form of goodness is the goodness which is like Hashem, which is like God. In other words, you could ask, look, I don't need a next world anyway. Just God should put us in this world, give us loads of sweets, chocolates, big houses, nice cars, whatever it is, and then we're good, right? So it's not how it works because the best goodness, I know it's a bit English, it gets a bit sloppy. The greatest form of good you can receive is goodness which is like God, right? And therefore, God created a way for us to earn our reward by doing godly things, as to be like Him and earning it, so it's our achievement as opposed to it being given as a free gift. Right? That's one of the elements.
But God never had to earn His goodness. He was infinitely good.
And that's true. But
So then, how are we emulating God if, like, because God didn't need to earn it?
Because you can only really have one infinite. In other words, the fact that you didn't need to earn it is just a product of being infinite, right? Meaning earning isn't the point per se, it's owning it more. In other words, we need to earn it in order that it should be really ours, owning it. You know what I mean? Whereas God has it anyway, he's infinite. Part of free will as well is that we need to be compatible with him to receive his goodness. We need to conduct goodness, if you like. And free will does that as well, hence earning it. Okay, in other words, God has free will, meaning no one tells him what to do, even teenagers. Whereas we also need to have free will, in making our decisions, making our choices in order to receive goodness. Okay, so basically, to try, I know it's a complicated concept, but to try and distill that, God is ultimate good. He therefore creates a place where we can earn goodness, and that is why we're put on this world to pass tests, to do mitzvot, etc., in order to earn our goodness to be like him, right? To earn reward effectively. Okay, there's other sources say the same. He says over here in the anonymously written Sefer HaChinuch 900 years ago that God doesn't get benefit when we do mitzvot. Otherwise, if you change him, he wouldn't be infinite. But he wants to give good to us. That goodness is commensurate with our ability to make ourselves recipients of that goodness through his mitzvot. Again, in other words, the world was created in order for us to receive goodness or to earn reward. So far, so good? Okay, I'm hoping that's a yes. Now, where it gets a little bit complicated is that there are various sources that seem to say something very different. There are various sources that tell us the world wasn't created in order to give us goodness, but it was created in order to manifest God's honor. Right? There's an odd one here. As Gideon, I'm sure you're about to pounce. But let me just show you the sources and then we'll explain it. So here the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, says that Kol hanikra bishmi elechvodiv v'rativ afasisiv, which means everything was created for my name and my honor. Right? We say in our prayers, blessed is Hashem who created us for his honor. Right? As the Netziv says, the purpose of creation is for Hashem's honor. Right? Now, the issue is this paints a very different picture than we had beforehand. Before, it was that the world was created for our goodness and to earn reward and for us to kind of, receive goodness. It sounds like it was human-centric. Whereas over here, it says that the world was created for God's honor. Right? That's a very, very different concept. Right, that's very much God's.
Why does it have to be either or? I mean, aren't there 70 perspectives of the Torah? Why is it even a problem?
Because they sound like it's not just either or, it's a bit contradictory. In others, it sounds like these are vastly different. Either it's for me or for you, so to speak. These are very different ideas. Right? Now, normally you could, in theory, one could have levels. When you're dealing with purpose, normally you've got one central purpose. And they're both claiming to be the central purpose. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of see how creating, even the thing to create a place for us to be able to emulate Hashem and do good is really manifesting Hashem's own infinite goodness. So it's also for him. Okay. Anyway, keep going.
There might be a byproduct, and it could be we're going to sail quite close to those waters, to be honest. but one has to be central. And like I said, they're both claiming to be central. Right. So that's the contradiction. Again, we're getting quite deep, and from next week we're getting very, very practical with free will. But it's a good topic to explore, even if it's a bit cryptic. All right. So is the world created for God's honor, or is it created for us? All right. Now, what we're going to do now in the next few minutes is try and resolve this. Which often in Torah it works like this, which is it looks like you've got a contradiction, but once you really unwrap one of the legs or arms of the contradiction, you realize, hold on a second, that wasn't what you thought it meant anyway, and therefore you reinterpret and re-understand. Okay, so it goes as follows. If you just take a step back, and if you tell someone on the street that, by the way, the Jewish teaching is that an infinite God created the world for his honor. Yeah, you'd be like, what on earth? We created the world for his honor. Right? What does that mean? An infinite God doesn't need our honor. On the contrary, if you say that the infinite God needs our honor, right, then he's lacking, surely. Right? Because it's like Gideon's question before, just much worse. If it's for his honor, it sounds like without us, then he's lacking. Right? So this is what one of the commentaries called Reb Chaim Friedlander, that's his name. He died in, I think, the 60s or 70s. So he explains as follows. He says there's a difference between a pathway and an end, or basically it means an end. He says like this. He says, of course, the ultimate end goal is to give us goodness. In other words, God doesn't, it's not that God was lonely and he wanted honor, therefore created the world, and now he's like feels really important. Infinite gods don't think that way, right? He created the world to give us goodness, as we said before. Hashem is essentially good, gives good to others, and this is where we can earn that goodness and therefore be compatible with him, and we own it, it's part of us, etc. And the next world will enjoy that. And that's our ultimate goal. What is all this for this honor business? So Chaim Friedlander explains something very, very nice. He says that the honor, I actually read it here, we've got a little bit of time. He says like this, the Ramchal is explaining that only after Hashem has created this revelation of his will, meaning only after Hashem created this world, so there's a pathway whereby we give him honor, as it were, that a pathway whereby we give his honor, as it were, became possible. In other words, it's not that God is lacking honor and therefore creates us and now kind of honors, it's all good again. Now he gets honor, he's okay. Right? That's not an infinite God, as we said, right? It means that acting for his honor is a pathway enabling us to earn that goodness after the world was created. He says, he closes by saying, in effect, fulfilling Hashem's will gives him honor. So let me put that in a bit plainer English, if you don't mind, which is like this. Ultimate purpose is to earn goodness. Right? How do we earn that goodness? So Hashem made it as if when we do good things, we contribute to his honor. In other words, it was a pathway, it was a means of facilitating us receiving goodness. Once he created a world, his purpose, once he created the world for our goodness, right? He then put a pathway in to facilitate us earning that goodness, which was if you do good things, it's as if you're giving honor to God. But it's not changing his essence. That's not purpose. That's more practical. That's more means, right? Goal and ends is we're earning goodness. We're doing good things. We're becoming more like God. We're earning reward. The way we achieve that is, as it were, giving him honor, right? It's a little bit like, trying to give a good example, where you might in a classroom put someone who's done great work or homework on the board. Right, that's not the goal. The goal isn't to be on the board. Maybe some kids think it is. The goal isn't to be on the board. The goal is really, as far as the teacher is concerned, to do the work. In other words, to excel. Right, the byproduct is being on the board. So here, and by the way, the teacher will create the being on the board as a mechanism or as a motivation for people to do well. It's a little bit similar here. The end goal, the purpose was to give us good. The mechanism through which that is achieved is that, as it were, we give God honor when we do mitzvot. Okay, let me just add one more piece. I know it's been a bit, true, this is a very cryptic topic to begin with, but free will will be, I guarantee you, free will will be easier. One other piece is like this. See, once we got this far, take another step. I'm going to stop sharing the screen actually. 1 second. Yeah. So like this. Yeah. Once we've successfully done this. Sorry, 1 second. Not very good. I'll do help with this. Okay, good. Sorry, me. Right. Once we've successfully achieved this, then there's one more thing that I think works, or one more avenue that needs a bit exploring, which is like this. In as much as Hashem's created the world to give us goodness, and that's the goal, whereas the means is giving him honor. So why are these other sources focusing on the fact that it's about God's honor? Surely you'd pick the end goal versus the means, right? If you did a tour around the school, led on a tour around the school, and the head teacher said, by the way, you know what's amazing? We have things on the board, kids' names on the board. We'd say, no, that's just a way of them getting good exam results. You know what I mean? Like that's the main thing, right? So why are these sources focusing on the giving God honor as opposed to, the second set of sources at least, focusing on giving God honor as opposed to the real aim, which is goodness? Why focus on the means as opposed to the ultimate goal?
Because I guess that's practical.
Good. That's exactly excellent, Gideon. That's exactly where I wanted to go. Right. So here's the slight anecdote. This is the easiest part of this evening. Rav Dessler himself was like a very, very competent, amazing writer and big Jewish thinker. So he and philosopher, meaning Jewish philosophy. He used to apparently tell off some of his students for over engaging in kind of philosophical thinking. Right? How so? Because he used to tell them, look, it's all very well the thinking and the abstract and the working out. He says, but it has to be grounded in action. Right? It has to be grounded in action. In other words, whilst of course, yes, we're a religion of big thinking and big ideas, but ultimately it has to be grounded in action. And the truth is, that's what Avraham taught. Right? He taught that big ideas are expressed in small steps. Your big idea of God existing is expressed in what I eat and how I speak and how I, and how I conduct myself, and even in the small minutiae. Right? That's why the world of Jewish law has very small minutiae. Yeah. So that's the basic idea. So I know we've gone a little bit fast. Again, I'm sorry tonight. I'm gonna have to slow down. But
So just try and get it clear. Are we saying really that we understand the essential purpose is goodness?
yeah.
Why do we talk about honor then? Well, we're saying because that's the pathway Hashem's given us in order to do the mitzvahs. And are we using the word honor because, he doesn't want us making our own stuff up? We saw last week what happens to those that make things up. And, that's not the way to do it. The way you do it is by listening to his mitzvahs. And that is the way of honoring him because you're listening to him. You're respecting his wishes, not trying to come up with your own. And that's why we're calling it honoring him, because that's what we're doing.
I wasn't going to go that far. The first part's definitely right, meaning the ultimate. I'm going to summarize the whole thing now. The ultimate purpose is for our good, to earn goodness. The honor thing is it's practically what you do to earn your goodness. As God created a means that when you do a mitzvah, when you do a good thing, a good deed, what Hashem wants, then you're honoring him. That, as it were, adds to God's honor. Doesn't actually change him. It doesn't. It's not the purpose. He's not lonely, but that was the mechanism he chose in order to facilitate us receiving goodness. It's not about us making up our own stuff versus following God. It's more just about doing mitzvah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Why are we using the word honor, not then, I don't know, respect or just listening to, or like
Yeah, that I don't know. Why is the word honor? It could be obedience. It could be loyalty.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good way. It sounds like it's a bit more than just I'm listening to him. It's God made it as if you're adding prestige to God when you're expressing him in this world. It sounds like expressing God in a place that doesn't lead to natural expression of God is a little bit what's the word? Is a little bit it gives honor to him. That's the best way of saying it. Okay, good people. I promise you, please God, that next week we're going to get much more practical. So I'm going to put the recording up and we're going to start free will, please God, next week.
Can you make sure there's one of your free will things we cover, paro and hardening of hearts?
We're going to do all of that. That's going to be the last section of free will. How can we have free will if God knows the future? What about impacting someone else? Can I impact someone else through my free will? Meaning, if I steal from someone, does that mean they deserve to lose it anyway, or did I subvert God's plan? All of that kind of stuff. That's going to be the last part of free will.
I'll wait.
All
Lovely.
right.
Much
Very good.
square.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Good night.